As 2025 has made clear, box office bombs come in many forms: cynical franchise reboots, overly weird original series, and more intimate flicks that get lost in the release date shuffle, just to name a few. What might have once seemed like a slam dunk ended up being a bit of a disaster for Disney's live-action Snow White remake. The update of this classic fairy tale was always going to be a long shot for profitability, considering its reported $269 million budget. Spending more on Snow White than the 2019 Lion King remake wasn't the best idea, and it pretty much ensured that the movie would have no realistic chance of becoming a big box office hit. It's not hard to understand the studio's confidence though, considering how well The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin all performed. But those are all remakes of 90s animated musicals. Something like Dumbo, meanwhile, cratered when it came out in 2019, seemingly proving that older Disney films just didn't have the same broad modern appeal. So even though the original is a beloved classic, the live-action Snow White was always going to struggle. The issue was only compounded by a poor marketing campaign and unnerving imagery, like the CG version of the Seven Dwarfs.
It's a human.
What did you think I was?
Nothing. Ghost.
Unfortunately, it looks like this movie's entire box office run is just one big poison apple. The 2025 box office really hasn't been kind to R-rated action flicks. Case in point, Novocaine, an $18 million feature starring Jack Quaid as Nathan Kane, a manager at a credit union who can't feel pain, who goes on a one-man rescue mission to save his crush. Paramount Pictures shelled out plenty of cash for a Super Bowl commercial and sent Quaid to all kinds of sports events in bandages and a neck brace. But the clear hopes of following in the likes of John Wick and Deadpool didn't exactly pan out. Novocaine only grossed $8.8 million over its domestic opening weekend and has failed to show much momentum since then. It's unlikely it will break even with its restrained budget. The film did actually earn decent reviews, so it seems like there was a chance it would do alright with audiences. One problem may have been the leading man. Even with the roles in The Boys and Oppenheimer, Quaid isn't a bankable big screen name just yet, so pitting the box office fortunes of Novocaine on his shoulders may not have been the best call.
Yeah. Totally.
For years, director Paul W.S. Anderson wasn't making anything besides Resident Evil movies. They were never huge hits domestically, although 2016's The Final Chapter did manage to secure about $312 million worldwide. In 2025, Anderson re-teamed with his wife Mila Jovovich for In the Lost Lands, a dark fantasy epic based on a short story by Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin. Most moviegoers didn't seem to care.
Please. Don't do this.
We have no choice.
On a somewhat hefty $55 million budget, In the Lost Lands has only grossed about $4.8 million worldwide, including just $1.8 million domestically as of April 2025. Part of the problem is simply the movie's domestic distributor. Whereas the Resident Evil movies were handled by Sony's Screen Gems division, Lost Lands was released by the much smaller Vertical Entertainment. Plus, the obscurity of the source material, despite coming from a well-known author, has only made it more difficult to stand out in the marketplace. Wolfman, Blumhouse's second stab at a modern Universal Monsters movie following The Invisible Man, had a reported budget of $25 million, which was a little high for the usually cost-effective company. The film was helmed by Lee Wanell, who previously directed the successful Invisible Man. But audiences didn't have much patience for this story of a husband and father who transforms into something monstrous after being bit by a mysterious creature. Wolfman only grossed $20 million domestically and $34.9 million worldwide. These anemic results reflected a perfect storm of bad elements. For starters, werewolf movies have had a mixed box office track record, and the marketing for Wolfman wasn't as distinctive as that of The Invisible Man. Plus, that $25 million budget made it hard for this R-rated horror to break even under the best of circumstances. Poor reviews certainly didn't help either. Perhaps it's time for Blumhouse to just stick to tiny budgets and original concepts. It's doubtful that 2025 will see a more bizarre major studio release than the Alto Knights. This 1950s set gangster movie directed by Barry Levinson saw Robert De Niro playing two separate real-life mob bosses, Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. But despite his star power, the Alto Knights made hardly a dent at the box office. The gangster genre has always been hit or miss at theaters, even in the best of times. In recent years, the likes of The Kitchen, Gotti, and White Boy Rick all flamed out pretty quickly. So what hope did the Alto Knights have in this environment. Still, few could have predicted just how badly it would go. The Alto Knights barely cleared $3 million during its opening weekend in North America, a dismal haul for a movie playing in over 2,600 theaters. It didn't get much better in the next few weeks either, as it limped to about $6 million domestically and only $9 million worldwide. Love hurts, but what's something even more painful is sitting through a movie that wastes so much potential like Love Hurts. A tepid John Wick pastiche, starring Ke Huy Quan as a mild-mannered real estate with a dark past, Love Hurts was hit with both terrible reviews and a terrible box office to match. Even on a thrifty $80 million budget, the receipts were disappointing. Love Hurts grossed just $17.5 million worldwide, with only a meager $1.9 million of that coming from overseas territories. In addition to the lack of quality, this was also a case of unfortunate timing. Love Hurts opened on February 7th, a few weeks after Companion and the same day as Hard Eyes, two other R-rated features that emphasized ironic romance themes in their marketing. Plus, January's heavy slate of action movies like Den of Thieves 2 and Flight Risk further meant that Love Hurts couldn't stick out in a crowded marketplace. Bong Joon-ho followed up his Oscar-winning 2019 triumph Parasite with a doozy. Mickey 17 promised moviegoers multiple Robert Pattinsons for the price of one ticket. Alas, based on the disappointing receipts, it seems like Pattinson is more indie movie darling than major box office draw. It probably didn't help that Mickey 17 has a somewhat complicated, offbeat premise. Pattinson plays a space traveler who keeps dying and then being cloned into new versions of himself. With a budget of $118 million, the movie has only grossed about $45 million domestically and $130 million worldwide. Shortly into its theatrical run, it was estimated that the film could loot as much as $75 million for Warner Brothers. In addition to Pattinson's questionable box office pull, the film was also hindered by how audiences tend to give original sci-fi flicks the cold shoulder. Even with the artistic pedigree of Bong and multiple Pattinsons, Mickey 17 just couldn't avoid that fate. Most of A24's most successful releases have been low-budget films that came from out of nowhere to take the world by storm. Nowadays, however, the studio is growing and taking on higher-profile enterprises like Civil War and the upcoming Marty Supreme. Even something lower-profile like the satirical musical thriller Opus reportedly still costs $10 million to make. A major studio like Disney wouldn't blink at that price tag, but for A24, it reflected a desire to make bigger and potentially even more lucrative genre fare. Unfortunately, Opus didn't come close to matching the box office heights of past A24 horror sensations. Despite launching in nearly 1,800 theaters, Opus only grossed $1.03 million over its domestic opening weekend. It totaled only $1.8 million in North America and just under $2 million worldwide. Mixed reviews pretty much doomed Opus from the start, although some critics did praise John Malkovich's performance as a reclusive pop star.
The crowd is upset.
A generic marketing campaign that failed to differentiate Opus from similar recent thrillers didn't help either. If Civil War showed in 2024 that costlier A24 movies could succeed, Opus was a more cautionary tale in this studio's evolution. Though it started shooting in November 2020 and was originally set for a March 2022 release, The Unbreakable Boy didn't hit theaters until February 2025. The excessive delays proved to be the most notable part of the pre-release hype for this inspirational true-life drama about a father's experience raising an autistic son. It was yet another faith-based tearjerker from director John Gunn, who had previously directed Ordinary Angels and The Case for Christ. Production label Kingdom Story Company has had many hits in the past, but Unbreakable Boy will most certainly not be counted amongst them. Its domestic box office run only amounted to $6.4 million, noticeably less than the studio's 2020 release, I Still Believe, which only got to play in domestic theaters for 7 days before COVID-19 shut things down. The Unbreakable Boy was hurt by countless obstacles, including competition for family dollars from the likes of Paddington in Peru and Dogman. Its source material was also relatively obscure compared to other faith-based flicks. Plus, it didn't help that star Zachary Levi was in the midst of a box office losing streak following Shazam! Fury of the Gods and Harold and the Purple Crayon. The actor begins with lots of potential as a starring vehicle for Ryan Gosling. He walked away from the project though, and Andre Holland stepped in to take on the role of an actor with amnesia in a small 1950s Ohio town. After years of radio silence, distributor Neon abruptly announced in February 2025 that the film would hit theaters in just a few weeks on March 14th. It opened in only 23 domestic theaters and ultimately grossed only about $40,000. Though no official budget has been released, the actor couldn't have possibly come close to recouping the costs of its flashy production design and star-studded cast, which also includes Gemma Chan, Toby Jones, and Joe Cole. You could certainly blame the oddball premise, but the box office failure of the actor is pretty much entirely due to its limited release and total lack of a promotional campaign. What movie could possibly break even with no real support or theatrical footprint? Angel Studios scored a massive win in 2023 with one of the biggest indie movies in history, Sound of Freedom, but the company has struggled to repeat that success since then. Sound of Freedom made more than $180 million domestically and $250 million worldwide, but more recent Angel Studios releases have struggled to crack $5 million. This problem was especially apparent with March 2025's Rule Breakers, which tells a true-life story of the first all-girls robotics team from Afghanistan. Despite opening in over 2,000 theaters, it grossed less than $3 million in its entire domestic run. Rule Breakers was a rare PG-rated feature for Angel Studios, which typically embraces PG-13 faith-based movies. Trying and failing to figure out how to market to families really hindered this title, which looked like a knockoff of a 2000s inspirational Disney movie. Plus, it apparently didn't appeal much to the older action fans who came out for the likes of Sound of Freedom and Homestead. Rule Breakers also had to face off against other faith-based competition, including The Last Supper. Furthermore, the film cost at least $8 million to make, a significant increase from, for example, the $2 million price tag of God's Not Dead. Rule Breakers was always going to struggle to be profitable, but few could have predicted that it would flail this badly.